Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We have Joel Loving with us today from TJL Environmental Health Consultants, and he's going to be discussing the mold issue in your latte and learn today. And so I'm going to go ahead and Josh, I think I just stole your thunder actually. So sorry about that. Josh, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Oh, no, that's perfect. Thanks so much. We're glad you're here.
I just took it right on over. Sorry about that. Josh is our master group chair for professional development, in case anybody didn't know. And he's also on our RPAC committee. So, okay, Joel, take it away.
All right, we're ready to go here. Well, you know, what's a good show without a rattlesnake? Everybody's watching Yellowstone right now, right? So you know what I'm talking about if you're up to date on the current season of Yellowstone, you know. But my snake here is not the Yellowstone snake. It's called Rita, and I've had her with me a long time, and she's plastic. I used to use these in presentations all the time at the university to let people know that a lot of the hazards that I manage are dealt with easily by not disturbing them. Same thing, you don't take a rattlesnake and throw it in a cooler and bounce it around and expect it to be happy. We don't want to disturb things like asbestos containing materials and lead-based paint and issues like that, or building materials like that, and usually they won't hurt us. You know, asbestos causes lots of lung diseases, but if we don't disturb it, it's not going to hurt us. Lead-based paint, cognitive development, we don't disturb it, or if it's in good shape, it's not going to hurt anybody. Radon's a little bit different. It sort of is ubiquitous. It's going to be a problem without disturbance. We can talk about that in another session. Mold is very much, though, like asbestos and lead-based paint. If you leave it alone, it's not going to hurt you typically, unless you have mold sensitivities or chemical sensitivities. Mold left alone is not going to be a problem. It might continue to grow if given food and water, because after all, it's like us. It likes something to eat and it likes something to drink. But, you know, and for the most part, the only difference between that is it eats organic matter. So it eats wood and paper, and we don't quite like wood and paper. And it also doesn't need liquid to grow. It just can grow if it's just given enough dampness, damp air, or humidity. So we'll talk about mold this morning, but just to let you know, we've been doing this since 1984 when we became incorporated. I was still at the university at the time, but just like the rattlesnake Rita, we can manage all these things safely, and that's what I've been helping people do for a long time, 37 years now. So we're going to talk today about mold, our uninvited guests living in your home. So what you see right here, can you see my pointer too, by the way? Okay, good. I see a nod there. This is the black slimy stachybotrys mold that everybody says it's black mold. It is a mold that grows because of water exposure, not just because of humidity exposure. And in this particular event, you know, you have a leaking pipe that's spraying on a wall and causes mold to grow on drywall. And drywall is a perfect mold food. It's paper, and it's got gypsum to keep the paper wet, and it's going to grow those nasty black, in this case, stachybotrys type molds. But in not all cases does that do you require water. A lot of cases, just humidity. This particular bathroom is not one that's in my house, thank goodness, but it's one that has grown a lot of mold mainly because of humidity conditions. But molds are a type of fungi. They're everywhere. They're ubiquitous in their environment. They play an important role in nature, but you know, not necessarily in our homes or our commercial properties that we sell or manage. I mean, if it wasn't for mold, as you can imagine, its job is to break down organic matter. So if it wasn't for mold, we'd be walking in a lot of crap out in our backyards, not to mention leaves and trees and dead bodies and poop and all that kind of stuff. So it's got a purpose there. By the way, I can't see anybody's expression, so I hope you're not blown away by some of the things I say. I apologize in advance. But molds are always allergens. But are they really toxic? Not all types of mold, not all species of mold are toxic. But when somebody start saying they've got these species, Stachybotrys, Chaetomium, Fusarium, some species of Aspergillus. These are the mycotoxic molds. And what is meant by mycotoxic, these molds release chemicals called the mycotoxins. As they grow, that's the putrid smell that you notice when you walk into a house that has had a bad mold problem. I think of it sort of like an airborne bee sting. If you are sick, or you're already sick, your immune system is in bad shape, or you have asthma or something like that, these mycotoxins are what causes your problem more so than the mold spores. It's the chemicals that are released by mold while it's growing. That's not only what you smell, but that's what causes your ailments and causes basically sick people to become sicker. So what we do in our job, of course, is we have to figure out what is causing the mold. We can go up to a house and say, yes, you got mold, but that doesn't do anybody any good. We need to figure out what's causing it. What is the moisture source? What is the source of water? What is the source of damp air? What's going on in that house? And of course, there's plenty of things that could be going on. You got plumbing fixtures that might be leaking roofs, excessive steam from cooking, showers, whirlpools, and yard grading could be a problem. Landscape plants too close to a house, shrouding it and keeping it from breathing, collecting all that moisture in the home. Of course, you've got floods, leaky basements, damp crawl spaces. We'll talk a minute about crawl spaces. They're a pet peeve of mine. And high humidity levels. All of that are moisture sources that we look for. We can also do air testing, and we've done plenty of that. If you don't see any visible evidence of a known or an existing mold problem, we can do air testing to see if something is hidden inside the ductwork or in the HVAC system, inside wall cavities or something like that. It is not always obvious when you have a mold problem. But the first thing we do when we go into the house, and I say we, it's me and I have one employee, Lisa, but I keep her busy on asbestos jobs. So you probably won't see her much on mold work. But the first thing we always do is a thorough visual inspection of the home before we even think about doing any air testing. And I like to tell people that I'm going to be doing an inspection of their home using a high intensity light, an ultra high intensity light, which is basically a good flashlight. I know where to look. We know how to look. We know exactly where the mold's going to be. If there's a suspected problem, we'll look close to the floor on hardwood, dark wood furniture, and that sort of thing, because we can find it if it's there. I can usually walk into a house and tell you pretty much right away whether you have a mold problem or not. So if molds are encountered, what is the source? Now, when we do air testing, by the way, healthy indoor environment should contain spore levels that are 30 to 80% lower than outside levels. And when I say outside level, that is outdoors. That's what we call the baseline. You can't do good air testing without doing a baseline outside air test. You got to have something to compare it with, because spore counts outside vary every day. And as we open doors and come and go, you're going to allow some of those spores in your house every day. So, you know, that's considered the baseline. If you're above that baseline, you might have a problem. You also don't want to see any significant amounts of mycotoxic mold spores. In other words, if we find 1 or 2 spore counts of Stachybotrys or Fusarium, these slimy molds that don't really become airborne that easily, then we know we might have a hidden problem in a house somewhere. This is an air test being done in a basement, and in this basement, they've actually covered the plastic walls. Covered the walls with plastic, and you actually have roots growing behind that plastic, and they wanted to see whether or not the mold that was obviously growing in these roots was causing a problem in the basement. Typically, if I see a problem again, I don't do air testing, but they wanted to know, so we did air testing in this basement, and of course, there were some elevated counts of all kinds of mold spores in that basement. We always do that outside air test. So if you see a report that does not have an outdoor baseline in it, that someone took an air test inside your home and they don't have a baseline, that's garbage. That report doesn't make any sense. It is of no value whatsoever. You got to have that outside baseline to compare with. So, mold remediation. By the way, I presume a lot of you have been in this business for over 15 years, selling houses and managing property. I know I've been in it for almost 37 years now. But over 15 years ago, I'm sure none of you had ever heard of the mold remediation industry. It's something that we didn't hear of growing up. It's something that, prior to 2005, there was no such thing as mold remediation contractors. Now there is. And my theory is that we've just become more of a southern state, you might say, because we've got more humidity during the summers. And a lot of that humidity gets trapped in our newer construction. And our newer construction has more porous construction materials. So we have a bigger mold problem than, say, our parents or our grandparents ever did, probably because of the combination of becoming a little bit more humid and having those construction materials that are a little more porous. But anyhow, large-scale mold remediation should be left to qualified people, people that have the right training, the right chemicals, the right equipment, personal protection, and all such as that. Now, in 2006, the Virginia Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation was tasked with licensing mold inspectors and remediators. I was on the board at the time. We worked 2 years to write these mold regulations. And then a new governor came in and decided, nah, we don't need those anymore. So it only lasted 1 year. So we had licensing like we do for asbestos, lead, and home inspectors for mold inspectors and remediators only for 1 year. And I think that was like 2008. Now we're back to the wild, wild west. So you're wondering, what do I look for in a qualified mold remediation contractor? Well, you need to ask for their credentials and their experience, their certificates of training, all such as that. You just don't want any Tom, Dick, and Harriet doing mold remediation in your home or someone else's home. So a little bit about how clean is clean. This is one of the cleanest environments you'll ever see, an operating room in a hospital, and a clean room such as that. I do testing every year over at Martha Jefferson Hospital, and you hardly find even one spore in a room like this. The exact opposite happens, though, in these caves under our homes called crawl spaces. And although this looks nice and a beautiful door, nice mysterious area here under this house, this is what you're most likely going to see when you start to enter the crawl space. So anytime you're ready to put on your suits and respirators and knee pads and go with me inside of a crawl space to see what's going on, I welcome you to come along. There's lots of fun in my business, as you can see from this one picture right here. So crawl spaces, let's just talk a little bit about crawl spaces. Crawl spaces that are vented to the outside is not a matter of if they have mold, it's a matter of how much mold they have. When you allow all of that humidity from outdoors to come in, you've got humidity from the soil that's exposed, that's exposing the wood, that is the organic matter in a crawl space like this. It's a recipe for growing mold. So any vented crawl space is going to have mold in it, guaranteed. It's just the way it is. And it's going to be growing on your wood products. In this case, this is mold growing on floor joists. It's also growing on these wires that you see down here. This is more of an aspergillus type quick growing mold. This can happen in just a couple of days, by the way. So if that dehumidifier that you might have and you think is working in your crawl space gives out for about a day, you can get mold growth very quickly on your floor joist in a crawl space. That's the stuff you see up close. Now, this particular shot is of some mold that's ingrained in wood in a crawl space. That's not necessarily grew since the house was built, because this particular house had a dehumidifier in it, but this probably grew during construction. Any home that is being built is likely going to be subjected to the elements. And when it gets wet, that wood is going to likely grow some mold, and then this is what you end up with, some ugly wood. The only way you can deal with ingrained mold like this is to either sand it off, but you want to be careful not to affect the structure and sand it too much. There is one company in town that has a dry ice grinder blaster, that could actually go in there, and they shoot this with the dry ice, and they could actually clean up the wood, make it look brand spanking new. But when mold is ingrained like this, it's not a whole lot you can do unless you can sand it or abrade it away. But it's not growing in this plastic pipe and all these wires that you see. It's growing in the dust that settles out on these surfaces. So when mold remediators go into a crawl space, they've got to clean everything, not just the wood, not just the subfloor. They have to clean duct surfaces, pipe surfaces, surfaces of all this wiring. So that's why it costs so much. They're in there for quite a while on their backs with all of those Ritas doing nasty work. And you know, when home inspectors inspect a house, they've got to be looking for like 3,000 problems. I fortunately only have to look for 2 or 3. So when they come into a house like this and they see that it's obviously got some structural issues and the soil is exposed and lots of things, they might miss the fact that there's mold up there on those floor joists too. I mean, rightly speaking, I can't blame them. That's pretty much not a big deal when it comes to the obvious problems. But if they go into a crawl space and they see some water that's standing in a corner, or a air conditioning system that is leaking and the condensate pump's not working and you got water all over the floor, then they're going to look up, and then they'll probably see mold on the floor joist. But if they see a good vapor barrier, they see a dehumidifier, if the insulation is intact, typically home inspectors are going to say that crawl space is just fine. What you see on this wall in this crawl space here is not mold. This is efflorescence. It's underground mineral salts. It's the crystallization of the minerals that come in from underground as moisture proceeds through that block wall, and then it evaporates and crystallizes. So that's not mold, but it's telling you that you do have moisture intrusion, which is going to add to the humidity level in this crawl space and cause the wood and the wood surfaces and organic matter to grow mold. But what happens when you have a crawl space that not only has damp air, but has water, or what you call water intrusion? Well, that's another problem altogether. And if you have water intrusion, that's something that needs to be dealt with before you can even think about dealing with your mold problems. There are obviously plenty of simple remedies, like taking your downspouts farther away from your house, or fixing your gutters, or cleaning your gutters. Usually that works, but if not, then you're going to be doing some dewatering in a crawl space. And that's just when you add the sump pump and the drain tile on the inside and basically pump that crawl space dry. Then you can go forward with your vapor barrier and mold remediation. Damp crawl spaces create damp floors, okay? If you're standing over a crawl space on your nice, pretty wood floor, if it's not dehumidified, whether it has mold in it or not, if it's not dehumidified or conditioned, if it's open to the outside, you're likely going to have a damp floor. And this is a surface moisture meter telling you that that floor over top of that crawl space has a wood moisture equivalent of about 25%. That means that every single dust bunny that settles out on your floor, under your furniture, under your carpeting, and places like that, it's going to begin to grow mold. You might not see it readily. This is the type of stuff I look for when we go into a home that has a damp crawl space. But you can fix a lot of this problem even if you don't do mold remediation in the crawl space, simply by dehumidifying the crawl space, getting a good vapor barrier down, sealing it off from the outside. But this is the type of stuff that you're going to find in a house and causes people to have all kinds of allergic reactions just because there's damp crawl space under it. And of course, it doesn't help any if you've got a lot of clutter that you throw on top of that crawl space, because then you're going to get mold and mildew growing on your stuff that's on the floor. And you're not going to have good ventilation in your house, and that just amplifies the problems. A lot of times you'll see a new treated, remediated crawl space and it's bright white. And why is it white? And that is because, or another color, that's because it's been encapsulated with an antimicrobial paint, and all of the mold that they can't scrub off or blast off, they coat, that's ingrained in the wood product, they coat with an antimicrobial sealant called an encapsulant. Now, as you can see in this crawl space, the floor joists are well encapsulated. The OSB board, however, is look, you get a little bleed through of the mold, and that's this dark area that you see down in this picture. That might need a second coating of antimicrobial. But that's basically why you see these crawl spaces painted white, because they can't get all of the mold off of the wood, so they have to seal it with an encapsulant. It's more important to get a good dehumidifier in a crawl space after you've done the mold remediation than any other step. You can do all this mold remediation, you can put new insulation in, get a great vapor barrier, and you're still going to have mold growth a year from now if you don't get a dehumidifier. And when I say a dehumidifier, I mean a commercial unit. This is a Santa Fe unit, works great. It's connected to a condensate pump, pumps out of the house. It's all automated. It has a filter that gets changed every 6 months or a year or so. And these things will last about 10 or 15 or maybe 20 years. If you go out and get you one from Costco or Lowe's, you're lucky to get 1 or 2 years out of it, because in a crawl space like this, these things run just about all the time. So you need a durable commercial unit in a crawl space. Basements, they're different animals too. Of course, unless they have a good poured concrete foundation, just about every basement in Charlottesville is going to be damp. It's going to need a dehumidifier. And what happens if you don't have one? You get mold growing on those good old dust bunnies that settle out all over top of things. You know, you have the cat fur and the dog fur and the dander. And dust, basically organic dust, is what's growing the mold. It's not necessarily the wood in this cabinet. It's the dust that's settled out on this cabinet that is growing mold. And that's one of those fast growing molds like Aspergillus and Penicillium that you see there. So here's your dewatering system. A lot of times before you even do anything in a basement to remediate it, you might have water problems. If you have water infiltration, then you'll need if you can't fix it, that is by your downspouts and gutters and grading the yard, you'll end up having to install a dewatering system. And that's what's here. The contractor chopped through the concrete, went down about 1 foot, filled it with drain tile and gravel, and then capped it back with new concrete, led that drain tile to a sump pump, and it's pumped out of the house, called dewatering. It's the last ditch effort to get a dry basement if you've tried everything else, but it works. And the companies that do this usually always guarantee it. So what you've got here in this particular vent, this is a supply register. Most people that see something like this think that that mold that you see here is coming from inside the ductwork. It's not. As that cold air gets forced out of a register like this, by the Venturi effect, it kicks up dust, which then is re-entrained back to this negative pressure area around the supply register. The dust, when it comes in contact with the cold surface of the register or this drywall in this particular case, because of the cold air coming out of this register, creates condensation. Condensation is water. Water plus organic matter creates mold. So this is not coming from inside the duct. It's coming from the humidity that's inside this house. And this quite often happens in basements or bathrooms or in houses where people run the fan on their air conditioner all the time and never operated on automatic, which they should. When you do that, the coils in the air conditioning system don't pull the moisture out of the air, and you just blow all that dampness right back into your home. So the first thing I look for when I see this in a house is what is the setting on the HVAC unit. If it's the fan is running all the time, this is likely what's going to happen. Some people heat their homes or basements with these non-vented gas stoves. This is actually the emissions from this. There's a lot of water vapor in it, and that can create a big time mold problem too. These things, if they're not vented, they're going to release a lot of water. And of course, you know what happens when that gets next to the dust bunnies. Condensation from windows that don't fit right, doors that don't fit right, bad seals, that is, or uninsulated windows, could cause problems beneath the window ledge, inside wall cavities. In this case, you can see the wood rot on the tack strip under the carpet that's growing mold, just because of the water that comes around this window goes through that wall cavity, and onto the carpeting. In this case, you didn't even know there was a problem until you pulled up the carpeting, and then you see it. That's, again, a problem that's caused by excessive humidity inside of a house. And this is the way, I guess, our laundry room may have looked when we had kids at home, but fortunately, this is in a hotel now. But these devices, dryers and washing machines, generate a lot of moisture. And so washing and drying rooms, a lot of times, are places where you can find a great deal of mold growth. If you ever see one of these guys, tell the people to please get rid of it. They're basically exhausting their dryers inside their basement, creating a problem with humidity, obviously, and mold growth, because you got all that lint that's going all over the place. You add a little bit of humidity or a lot of humidity coming from your dryer. These are a recipe for a lot of problems here. So you don't want to see these lint traps anymore. This is a floor register. My story about floor registers is they are basically trash cans. Everything ends up in your floor register. When you sweep your floors, it goes into your floor register. In this particular case, this floor register was in a fraternity house. Well, every Tuesday or Wednesday morning, when they had to get rid of their old stale beer from their beer kegs after their party on Friday and Saturday nights, they would drain their stale beer down into the floor register. And this is sort of what they got as a result. They cooked their beer with their heat and generated a lot of yuck stuff down in the register. Well, most houses aren't this bad, but to point out, floor registers can be problematic. They can collect a lot of debris. That debris can grow mold. It can get scattered into your house through the form of mold spores. Not always a good thing. Also, ducts that are lined with fiberglass insulation. Another word for them is duct board. You've probably seen this in some houses. It is insulated with fiberglass on the outside. It has aluminum wrap. This stuff collects dust. If that dust or these ducts are ever down in a crawl space, they get damp, or they're in a location where water gets into them, or maybe people are running their fan all the time and never pulling out the moisture from their air, you're going to get mold growing on the dust inside these duct liners. And you cannot clean this. Duct Medic and those companies cannot clean this. They'll tell you that you have to replace it. Duct board is a cheap way of constructing an HVAC duct system in a house, but I would not recommend it for that reason. It collects dust, it grows mold, you can't clean it. Now, more and more houses are going to whole house dehumidifiers. That's what you see right here. That's a great idea. If you have room for it when you're building a house, quite often you do. That's a good addition to add. But, if you don't have room for it, you can't always do it. But I would say that that would take care of all of your humidity problems for sure. And it would hide it in your HVAC system, mechanical room, and you wouldn't have to look at a dehumidifier sitting in your basement. Attics. Briefly about attics. Attics are usually not places where mold likes to grow because they're hot, for one thing, and most of them are pretty well vented through gable vents and ridge vents and all such as that. But if you're going to exhaust your bathroom up into the soffit opening and don't get that exhaust through the roof or through your soffit, this is what you might end up with. And so you can actually see their water droplets right there. That's condensation. This is mold growth. It's actually spreading in both directions. This was a contractor building problem. They should have run that exhaust outside through that soffit to the outdoors. But this is one way you can cause a problem pretty readily in new construction. Now, what you notice about this particular attic is the roof sheathing is clean and the roof trusses are not so clean. This is a result of construction and allowing these roof trusses to sit outside for a while, and they're going to grow mold as they sit outside and get rained on and whatnot. Then they put them in a house. Then you got mold in your house from the get-go. It's the good news is it's in an attic, which is vented to the outside. The bad news is a home inspector will see this stuff and they'll red flag the place. So if you've got any control over the construction of your new home whatsoever, you want to try to get this nipped in the bud. And the companies that have the dry splasters can get all this wood good and clean before you fill that attic with insulation and hide all the mold that's on the roof trusses. But typically, attic mold is not harmful to you. It's more of an aesthetic problem that is going to cause a headache when you sell a house because it's got mold in it. Even though it's not a health hazard, it is not pretty. So I'd like to close by saying this is a picture of a house from my hometown of Columbia, Virginia, in case anybody has ever been through the streets of Columbia. It's in Fluvanna County. This house right here is got plaster in it and is well ventilated, as you can see. Didn't have very many mold problems, but this is where I'm from. And then, of course, you might as well say I married up because my wife, she's from Albemarle County, and this is the way all the houses look in Albemarle County, of course. And of course, none of them have mold problems. Well, you never know. You can't judge a book by its cover, as they say. So, excuse me, you could have some mold in a house, even beautiful Albemarle County. So I'm not saying that you're not going to. You have lots of opportunities. The construction materials are more porous. The homes are tighter. There's more potential for there to be mold growth in a tight, beautiful home in, say, our local area. So yeah, I married up, and there's an example of it. There's my family at our beach house in Kerala, and as you can tell, they're not too bad a looking a bunch, and so I think I did okay. And of course, for all you realtors out there, just letting you know, you all like commission. We rent this place out in the summertime for a weekly basis, so get in touch with me, and we can see what we can work out. See, there's Loving Life. That's the name of it, Loving Life, Kerala Beach. You can look it up. All right, that's it for me. I hope I've covered everything in fast enough order that you've gotten a little bit of knowledge about mold here. Should I ask, are there any questions? I don't know how this works. This is my first Zoom thing. Yes, Lori.
Lori, you need to unmute yourself.
Pardon me?
Lori needs to unmute herself.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you, yes.
All right. Hello, Joel. Nice to see you.
Yeah, you too, Lori. Long time.
Yes, it has been.
Yeah.
Wanted to ask a question about the picture in the basement that had the plastic wall covering and the mold on the cinder block on the other side of the plastic mold. I mean, the plastic. Was that a good idea for the homeowner to put that plastic? I know they were trying to cover the situation, maybe to seal it, but it doesn't seem like seems like they're avoiding the issue rather than addressing it.
That plastic was put there for a different reason. It wasn't put there to block those roots. It was put there initially when they put up their walls in the basement, which were torn down, and you saw the plaster. It was not a good idea. Let's just put it that way. When you start putting plastic on underground walls, I'm going to try to find that slide right here. There. Nope, that's not it. All slides.
It's number 8, Joel.
Number 8. Oh, good. Thank you for helping me out in my slideshow here.
You're welcome.
There you go. All right. Yeah, that plastic was put up before the wall was put up. As you can see, these wall slats, they were installed, and then a wall was installed over it. And it was there for a vapor barrier. Now, the problem with putting a vapor barrier under the ground is you're going to get condensation on the back of it. And that condensation is going to drip down the wall. It's going to get into your drywall, wick back up, and cause mold to grow at the base of the drywall. Not a good idea to begin with. That was not something they put up there to cover their tree roots. No.
After the cement blocks were put up, should that plastic have been taken off?
Yes.
Ideally?
Oh, without a doubt. You should not have that plaster there. I mean, that plastic there. You should not have plastic in our region as a vapor barrier on exterior walls of a house at all, because you need these walls to breathe. They need to breathe moisture. If they don't, you're going to trap moisture. That's going to cause condensation. That's going to cause the condensation to grow mold in your drywall, typically in your wall cavities. So not a good idea.
Thank you.
I've got a question.
Yes, where are we here?
Hey, Joel, it's Jenny Barefoot. How are you?
Hey, good, Jenny. How are you?
It's good to see you online and not in Multi House.
Yes.
Hey, I have 2 questions. You
Sure.
and I were in a house once that I called you into see if the bathroom had mold and you said it was mildew.
Yes.
Can you explain how to identify the difference?
Yeah, mildew is mold, but mildew typically grows in dander, which is what you're going to find in the bathroom, dead skin cells basically, and cloth material. Mold grows in wood products and paper products, that sort of thing, different organic matter. It's still all fungi, it's still all mold. But the thing about what I call bathroom mold is you're never going to get rid of skin cells and dander in a bathroom. You're never going to get rid of steam in a bathroom. That is why they sell Pylex. All right. You're going to have to keep those bathrooms clean because you're not going to get rid of the moisture source. All right. So it's just a matter of cleaning. And it's not a dangerous mold. Typically, that's cladosporium or penicillium or something that's fairly innocuous.
But I guess the question is, how does the layperson identify what's the difference and how it needs to be treated?
Depends on usually what is growing on. So let's just say you have mold growing in a bathroom or you have mold growing in clothing. That is something that can be easily cleaned. If it's growing in drywall paper, not so much. You can't get it out. You're not going to clean it from that drywall paper. You're going to end up having to replace the drywall. Does that answer your question enough?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, one more.
May not be able. If you see those black splotchy molds like I showed initially in this show, that's not something that anybody can clean. That's mold that's growing inside the construction materials, not just on the outside, but the inside as well.
Okay, so one more question, sorry. So when we have a home inspection and we see evidence of mold, like more commonly in a crawl space, do we need to know what kind of mold it is in order to treat it? Or is it the fact that it's mold and are they all similarly treated? You cut out the, you remove it and you encapsulate it.
Yeah. Any mold in the crawl space is treated the exact same manner.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter what you have in that crawl space. Now, if it's ingrained, it's been there a long time. In other words, they're going to have to get in there and pull it out of the wood either by their dry ice blasting or sanding or covering it up with an encapsulant. But no, any mold in a crawl space is treated the same way.
All right. Thanks, Joel.
Sure.
I have a question.
Joe, I'm sorry, Joe. I'm sorry, Shan. I had someone put a question in chat asking, I'm sorry, which remediators use the dry ice blasters?
Well, I can tell you that is right now, Weather Seal and Service Master have dry ice blast.
I'm
Local.
sorry, Shane.
I'm sure more of them around town or around the state too, but locally they're the only two contractors I know of that use those. And they're expensive pieces of equipment, but they save a lot of labor. So one cost counteracts the other typically. But it's a good way of getting mold. Good way to get wood looking new again.
Go ahead, Shan. I'm sorry that I jumped in front of you like that.
Thank you. Joel, to pivot off Lori's question about should you put plastic on basement walls?
Yeah.
I've never been able to get a understanding as to why encapsulating a crawl space is a good thing, because you've put plastic up against walls that there's still moisture between the encapsulation and the foundation.
A great question. I'll tell you the difference. In a crawl space, when you start getting condensation behind that plastic, where does the condensation go? It goes back down in the ground. In a basement, when you get condensation on the outside of that vapor barrier, it's going to come back down to the floor and then wick back up your drywall or whatever your finished product is, if you see what I mean. So in a crawl space, you want to keep that moisture down under the ground. If you've ever put a vapor barrier over top of the soil in the crawl space and you use a clear vapor barrier, you'll notice there's all kinds of condensation under it. You want to trap that condensation in the ground so it doesn't get in your crawl space, which causes your dampness in your crawl space. Because if you weren't trapping that condensation or trapping that moisture, then your dehumidifier would run and run and run and never do any good. So you see, it's all a matter of where is that condensation ended up? Is it ending up back in the ground? or is it ending up on the floor of your basement? And that'll tell you right there, you don't want it in a basement, but you can put it in a crawl space.
Okay. Yeah, I was also worried about the construction material deteriorating, but I guess if
You
it
don't
is,
want to put it on your wood base plate. That's one important thing. A lot of contractors in the beginning days of mold remediation found it easier to staple the plastic vapor barrier to their wood base plate instead of hilty gutting it to the concrete block walls. And if you do that, you're going to trap moisture in wood and cause wood rot and bugs and stuff like that. So you want to bring that vapor barrier up to the level of the outside ground, but you don't want to bring it all the way up to your base plate or your subfloor or anything, because that will cause problems.
thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Joel.
Hey,
I've seen,
Sorry again.
That's all right. Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay.
oh, I'm sorry, Lori.
No worries.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
I've seen crawl spaces that have been encapsulated in different ways. And sometimes the new insulation is put back up under the floor. Sometimes it's gone around the walls.
Both.
Is there a better, which is better with all of that?
Well, what you're trying to accomplish here is weather insulation from the outside. So, you know, after you encapsulate a crawl space, if you're not concerned about noise and the dehumidifier running or any big equipment down there, then probably the best thing to do is to insulate your wall, because you're
Okay.
trying to keep weather out of your crawl space. And now that you've sealed those openings, those vents on the outside foundation walls, there's no reason not to insulate the walls. And it's a little less expensive too. So I would have to go with, let's insulate the walls as the best option after you have encapsulated a crawl space. You can do it either way, but you know, you get the advantage of using less insulation. You can see your floor. You can tell if something's going on. It's a little easier to fix the pipe if it breaks and don't have all that insulation in the way on the ceiling. So I would say wall insulation is probably a better idea if you're going to retrofit a crawl space and encapsulate it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I had another question.
Sure, Lori.
Now, I always thought that leaving the foundation vents open was a good idea to let the air circulate. And then listening to you in the beginning, I thought, that's not such a good idea. Close those babies. And now I'm still confused. Should they be open or closed? And is that seasonal?
All right. If you're going to leave your vented crawl space vented, it's seasonal. That's the idea from the old days, to open it up in the summer, let it ventilate, close it in the winter so it doesn't, the pipes don't freeze. That's basically all there is. But a vented crawl space will grow mold whether the vents are open or closed, because you're either trapping moisture or you're allowing moisture in, because those vents are down at ground level where there is lots of humidity outside. So you're basically just inviting humidity into your crawl space when you have a vent. So for heating and cooling and freezing problems, you know, follow the old open and close thing. But either way, you're going to get mold until you close those
Keep
things
doing what we're doing.
and
seasonal.
put in a dehumidifier and seal the crawl space floor.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Joel, this is Carol Costanzo, and I've got a question for you about historic houses. I've shown several, and actually one very recently where the houses are built like in the 1800s, early 1900s, and there is really not hardly any access under portions of the house, and you can see on the floor, the white powdery and on the moldings and actually a little of the wall. And my clients were so freaked about it that they never contracted on them. But I'm curious, how do you remedy that?
Well, it's you can either go the simple route or the expensive, difficult route. Let's just say the expensive, difficult route would be to get into that crawl space and actually excavate it until you can get it down low enough, the soil down low enough to encapsulate it and put a dehumidifier in. But that that might be impractical for a lot of older houses. So really all you can do at that point is to install, I would say, a whole house dehumidifier, something like that, to keep the upstairs as dry as you can, because you're going to always be battling that dampness coming out of that crawl space. So I would say that once you clean your floors, get all of those mold, spores, dust bunnies up, if you can install a whole house dehumidifier, you can probably keep that from happening again. But you're always going to be battling that dampness coming from the crawl space.
Thank you.
Sure.
Joel, I have a question. This is Logan Claylow.
Hey.
Can you clarify the dehumidifier a little bit more for me, please? Do they automatically kick on when the moisture becomes a certain percentage,
right.
or do they run all the time?
No, they kick on as needed. So they're on a humidistat. And I always recommend that in a crawl space, you set those at about 40, 45%. And that is because you want to keep the humidity under 60% throughout the crawl space. And if you put them in the middle, it's the best idea. But if you had them offset maybe on one side of the crawl space, which I don't recommend, but a lot of contractors do it because it's easier. They don't have to work as hard to get it into the middle of the space. But at any rate, if you're going to have it at 45% right there at the dehumidifier, at the far reaches of that crawl space, it may still be above 60%. And that's why you want to run it low. But back to your question, it will cut off when it hits that set point when it comes down to that set point of 45% or whatever you set it on. It'll shut off. So that way you can run them all the time, basically. They'll shut off as they need to.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you.
Sure.
I have another
Last
question.
question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Laura, you've been trying.
Sorry about that. Joel, I imagine the cost of your general mold inspection depends on the size of the house. Can you give us a baseline for what
Sure.
that costs?
Yeah, it's more on where you're located. If you're in, Southwest Virginia, it's going to take me a little longer to get there and use up more of my day. But if you're in town, Charlottesville, I offer, if it's a small house, it's $150 just to do a consultation. If it's a big house, it might be a little bit more, but I can usually tell whether there's a problem just by a consultation. That doesn't include a written report, doesn't include any testing. So if you need any kind of testing after that, you're talking about lab fees. If you need any kind of written report, letterhead type stuff, pictures and all of that, that just takes me more time. I try to be a la carte and do what I can to help people without, spending all their money on a problem that really isn't a problem.
Thank you. Good idea.
Sure.
I had a question about humidity levels inside the house.
Mhm.
What are your optimum set? When is the humidity at an alarming or take action place, and when is it a healthy humidity?
All right, typically molds grow in humidity that's above 60%. All right, so you want to keep it obviously under 60. I would say the healthy range at a home is about 30 to 50, in that range. It can get really dry in the winter. You don't want to get it down much below 30, or you're going to have problems with wood splitting and dry skin and dry eyes and all such as that. But in the summer, you don't want it to get over 60. So that's a good range to strive for. Now, when it rains a lot outside, it's probably going to hop up over 60% for a little while, but you don't want it continually over 60%. And you can get away with it maybe for a day or two, but not much longer than that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Joel, it's Jenny. It's Jenny again. Can you talk about whether you recommend sealing a crawl space or conditioning a crawl space and what the difference is?
Conditioning is basically allowing the air conditioning system to enter the crawl space, and it is something that's allowed in new construction. All right. So I would say if there's a house that's being built and that's what the contractor wants to do, what they're essentially doing is opening a supply register in the crawl space, but not a return. And the problem with doing that is you're pressurizing the space, but you're not ventilating the space, if you see what I mean. And so it has moderate success. If you were to put a return in the crawl space, you might be in better shape, but then the problem becomes you're inviting that crawl space into your house. I mean, you're circulating air down in your crawl space, which might have a rip in a vapor barrier somewhere, might have some, I don't know, might have some rodents down there that pee and poop, and you'll get all those fumes upstairs. So it's one of those things that I don't think is a great idea, but it is allowable by constructing new construction. I would say that if you're purchasing a home and it has a crawl space that's conditioned, I would consider sealing that vent off and installing a commercial dehumidifier, just so you can isolate that space from the house a little bit better.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Joel, speaking of the vapor barriers in crawl spaces, I hear different things as far as the recommended thickness.
Yeah.
What do you recommend?
Well, you do have options. Most contractors would like to use 6 mil thickness plastic, which is the easiest stuff and the cheapest stuff, but it doesn't hold up very well.
Right.
I recommend at least 10 mil, and the best would be 20 mil. 10 mil is a thick plastic that you can still penetrate. It does the job. It's not too awkward to deal with, pretty fast to put down, not too expensive. But it's the minimum. The 20 mil is more like a pool liner. I mean, the good thick stuff, the white stuff that you see in some crawl spaces, it looks like, you know, you can make a swimming pool out of it. That's optimal. And it's going to hold up better. If you have a lot of traffic in your crawl space, it's where your HVAC system is, and you got to send somebody in there to change filters and whatnot on a frequent basis. 20 mil is the way to go. And if you look at the overall cost of remediating a crawl space, you're usually somewhere in the range of $5,000 to $10,000. Okay, somewhere in there. And the vapor barrier part, the difference between a 10 mil and a 20 mil vapor barrier is probably only $500 or $600. So I would say go with the 20 if you can. Once you get to the fact that they're down there doing all that work and it's a lot of labor involved, what's another $500?
Right. Thank you.
Sure.
Does anyone else have any other questions for Joel before I turn this over to Josh White, if he's got any roundup information for you?
I have one question.
Sure. Hey, Barb.
In general, are there fewer mold situations in houses with basements rather than crawl spaces? I haven't been around as many crawl spaces in my life until I came here, and they all just seem to have problems. It seems like
the problem with a crawl space is you don't go in there every day. A basement, you might go in every day. You'll see a problem and nip it in the bud. But quite often, crawl spaces are only entered by the home inspector that comes to look at a house where the crawl space has been sitting there for 20 years getting damp, and there's mold there you didn't even know about. So let's just say that they're both potentially damp, but you don't give much attention to the crawl space that you do the basement. And for that reason, crawl spaces are quite often a larger problem than basements. But both of them need to be basically kept dry.
Okay, thanks.
Good.
Josh, do you want to round us out today, or?
Yeah, Joel, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Joel really is a fun guy. So
Old moldy Joel.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Appreciate your expertise, and thanks for joining us. I know you're busy, and appreciate what you do for the realtor community as well. So, so our last Latte and Learn is going to be on Friday, December 3rd from 9 to 10. So mark your calendars for that. This session is going to be on solar, but it's going to be unlike what you're used to hearing on solar, like kind of the nuts and bolts of solar. It's going to be more, how do you as a buyer's agent kind of itemize value for your clients when you come up to solar. So I think this one's going to be super helpful because that's always a really good question and something that's a little confusing as well. So I think it's going to be super practical and less about the kind of nuts and bolts of solar. So please join us for that. Again, Friday, December 3rd. Joseph Gentile and Nathan G of Pearl Certification will be there, and Tad Luttrell of Segura. So we got some good folks that will be helping us with that. Registration's free, so make sure you look at the CAR Education and Events portal. Thank you again for joining us today. And Joel, appreciate it. And I hope you guys have a great weekend.
Joel, if you wouldn't mind really quickly, could you put in your contact information into chat for anyone? We have a couple of people asking for your contact info. So before I close this out, if you wouldn't mind putting your information in there real quick, contact information, I'll let people snag that before.
You tell me how and I'll do it.
If you go down the bottom of your screen, you should see something that says chat. Like a little icon, you may have to hover it's either at the top or bottom.
Let me just see. I'm not there yet. No.
Okay, if you just want to tell folks what it is, this is being recorded, so they will be able to re-review. And if you want to just tell everyone.
Yeah.
If you Google his name, it comes up.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, you can Google TJL Environmental or my name. It all comes up on my website's tjlenvironmental.com. That's my initials, Thomas Joel Loving. tjlenvironmental.com, and the number is 434-962-8721. Does that do it good enough?
I think so. Well, thank you all very much for being with us today. And be sure to log into the CAR calendar and register for December 3rd.